Hello, Peter.
Yes.
So turn my camera off somehow.
Okay, right. So, Peter, thank you very much for being with us. It's very nice to finally listen to you. We've been planning this for a long time, and it's very exciting to have you talking to us in our community. So, please, would you like to introduce yourself briefly to everyone? Yeah. And you can start. We're going to just do the presentation and listen and wait for the questions by the end, all right?
And as was mentioned, for clarification or whatever,
okay.
Join in. I'll do that. Okay. Hey, folks, I'm Peter Robertson. I'm from the Netherlands, by the way. My last name is Scottish, from Scottish ancestry, but I'm Dutch as Dutch can be. Born and bred in Rotterdam, so forgive me my Dunglish once a while. My background is from origin health medicine. I'm a MD, studied MD medical education in Amsterdam. Did immunology, a big chunk of that at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And then went to my first love back in psychiatry and neurology. And I was chartered in 1987 and did part of it in the Bay Area, especially my schizophrenia. Part of education was there. And what do you do when you're a psychiatrist? The first thing I did was go to KPMG, the accounting firm, became a consultant and worked there for 10 years. First in Amsterdam, then in London, and then all over the world. And then I kept traveling all over. First at KPMG and later in a small London-based partnership I started. And all this, whatever, almost 40 years, I was in business transformation in the USA, Europe, and Asia. My passion is always be, research. Give me better do a scientific article than a roman or a book or whatever. So I never stopped, and I always had one leg in academia. First in Monterey, we just said it before we started, and then in China at Zhejiang Dasui in Hangzhou, and last 12 years in Netherlands at the NEO, the Business University. So and what I do there, if people ask me what do you do, what is your how do you call what you're doing with this weird background, I say I'm an organizational ecologist, not focusing primarily on make the world greener, but learn from ecology and how to apply that in management and leadership. So that's the short of where I'm coming from. Now, one of the topic tonight is one I'm passionate about. It's very down to earth, but it is why do we make such a mess of this world? That is basically what I'm thinking about. There's so many ways about we can think about a topic, and I share one of my stories. And when I say one story, I mean not that I have a handful, I have only one story. But 5 years ago, I had a different story than I have today. And in 5 years, I probably will have another one developed or matured from what I'm telling today. Angela, thanks. I'm honored. And to all of you, by the way, to steal a bit of your time, to share a snippet of my own adventure. And I promise you to manage expectations. I'm not going as, by the way, as Andrew, you did last time, so perfectly make it very practical. I give you a bunch of my reflection, and it will be some theoretically, but for sure not with solutions. But I think like we realized, Andrew and I, that come a little bit from the same background. And by the way, your book, I cannot stop saying that, is always useful, inspiring. It's always somewhere at the end.
Thank you.
Always love to say that to the person who wrote it. And we'll be soon be in Exeter and see whether we can handily meet in person. Okay. What I assume we all have a background in cybernetics. I myself read Ashby when I was 14, so you can safely conclude I was something of a nerd. I still am. And from there, I went to Gregory Bates and Stafford Beer and others, and then it never stopped being a way. When I look here on one of my shelves here, there is the Ashby's book open on the pages of the Law of Requisite Variety. That's always there, almost as a sculpture. And I think the other thing I think we share is, I guess, a sense of urgency and pain about what I just said already, the mess we create on Earth, ecologically, socially, politically, mentally. And there is a start I like to make about what some friends learned me from archaeology and neurophysiology. That when you ask, where did this start? This human development we live in now, the modern times of, it points all the time back to a critical time, some 10,000 years ago. That moves it into the late Stone Age, the Neolithic, and especially to that phase where people shifted from hunter-gatherers to a sedentary farmer lifestyle, where they stayed and got specialization of functions and the like. There is a lot of scientific momentum that something special happened there. To say it more vernacular, we can say from hunting to farming, we transform from slow food and high diversity to fast food and low diversity. That is a bit too simple, I guess. After that period, when we started to become steeped in agriculture, we built cities, hierarchies, roles, governments, rules, laws, etc., etc. And there's as much evidence that all kinds of derailments surfaced, like famines, malnutrition, diseases, oppression, slavery, greed, power-hungry politicians, dictators, name it all, torture, wars. And a parallel. During this period, humans continued with art, as before, by the way. There's not much change in art over that period, but also developed new technology applications and a far better understanding of the world, especially from a natural science perspective, as is visible in healthcare, creation, transportation, digital technology. I'm repeating what we all know. And it seemed almost obvious, so that is a sort of general idea that is human development of the last 10,000 years was sort of done thanks to our brain. And the changes in the brain that created this smartness we have, and that made it. I hear a weird noise out over, luckily, good. However, some 30 odd years ago, it became more really clear that the human brain had not changed, not even a bit over the last 60 to 200,000 years, 60 to 200,000 years. And this means that changes of the last 10,000 years were definitely not happening due to changes in the brain. Not. Simply, the answer is simply not. And conclusion from archaeologists and neurophysiologists, by the way, like Renfrew and Atsushi Iriki and many others, is that the whole transformation must have had an external cause, not an internal one. And besides, there was no possibility even of assuming an improved brain, because there is another logic why human brains and the emerging minds never could have outsmarted the ecosystem suddenly. I share a few of these ideas, and then I go more to my main presentation. This is all a little bit of a starter and a background. The simple one of this reason why the brain could never have outsmarted evolution is simply that, what I said already, that it takes a long time before you have changes in the brain. 10,000 years is evolutionary, actually nothing. And even if it changed somewhat since 10,000 years ago, it would be minute. It would not be really relevant. But the second is, deals with Ashby's law of requisite variety, which tells us that the brain, over the couple of hundred of million years, should have been matching the complexity of the environment, the ecosystem it needs to survive. It should have a matching model in the brain, and better have a good one. And that means the idea that the brain would be sort of completely modeled like any ecosystem is likely, is reasonable. But anyway, being so close to an ecosystem, why should you suddenly become better than an ecosystem if you have 100 of million years be like an ecosystem? And there's a third reason that the brain could never be smarter than the ecosystem. That is because that's technically you could call it because of the law of least action. But more practically, it means that evolution never invests in something that is useless. No energy investing in something that you don't use at the moment. This law of least action, probably well known for some, for those who aren't. There's an excellent YouTube of Richard Feynman on YouTube about the law of least action. And it means also more practically, when I explain it to my executives, who are definitely are not academic, I follow Richard Feynman there and say, if you throw a ball, it always goes curved, and you never ever see suddenly a ball making an angle of 90 degrees. It's always that way. It always goes the same way. And look, in nature, there's never, when you look in a forest or a wood or wherever nature is, you never see a straight line, perfect square or a cube. Nature never uses straight lines or squared angles. By the way, that was a question that my God, that lived with me already from when I think I was 6 years young. But anyway, a conclusion is the brain, it is not only that the brain didn't change, the brain was about as smart as the ecosystem and could definitely not be smarter. So the conclusion, I will work towards that conclusion during my speech, that if that is the case, this 4 billion year old ecosystem, this cybernetical beautiful pattern of feedback and feed forward loops and a fantastic fine mazed and high requisite variety system, 4 billion years a success formula, to invent something that is better would be a difficult thing. And I'm closer and closer and closer to the conclusion that we did not evolve the last 10,000 years because we became smarter than the ecosystem, but more likely we became less smart than the ecosystem, and that has luxated our development over the last 10,000 years. Okay, that was my short sort of background from where I'm coming. I'm going to share a slide. Here we are. There we go. That's it. Question, can you read it? Is it okay? Can you see this? If
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
Oh, super. Now that paradox, what I was talking about, is called the Sapient Paradox. Renfrew was the first who mentioned this, but he was not alone. It was a whole direction in archaeology doing that. Here it is. I see the pictures over here. Let's have a look. Put them over there. Yeah. Okay. What I've this is basically what I summarized last 5 minutes, 7 minutes. You see here on the top, this first line is these 200 years of the brain unchanged. This is the last 10,000 years on the dotted line below. This whole range from left to right is the whole 4 billion years, almost at this 3.7 precisely. And suddenly we started, that is this circle 10,000 years ago to go in agriculture, and we switched in a new way of exploiting ecology in a non-ecological controlled way. We got exponential fast growth. I come to that in a few minutes. And then down under, the whole long, almost 4 billion years of ecological control. One of the outstanding differences is always that I think what we have done is exponential fast growth. That is what we like. And ecology does it the reverse. It's organic and it is slow. So this is a bit the historic picture of that whole sapient paradox thing. Yeah, okay, go to the next one. Wait, you know, I like to show one picture, which I use very much for my in my executive lectures. And that's the question: what's the stronger and most sustainable system? I show my audience this picture of a natural prairie. It's a nice mess. It's very strong. It's a nice mess. And then I show a nice picture of a garden or a little park. It's probably more like a park than a garden. And I ask them, what is the strongest, most sustainable of the two? Now, all over the place, South Africa, China, America, within seconds, and you probably too say, hey, oh, that's the prairie. And in my lectures, I can use a whole afternoon with this simple slide. Now I will share it with you in a few seconds, but you can imagine. And then the next question is what I ask to my dear executives is, okay, now you have said this, the prairie is the strongest and the park is the weakest. The prairie does it by itself and survives, and the garden you must maintain every day and put a lot of energy in it, etc., etc. That's the weaker system. And then I ask them, and most of them are decision makers in companies or governments here in the Netherlands. How do we mostly organize our organizations, knowing what the strongest system is, and all start laughing because they all say it's like the garden. That's how we organize our world. Now that is sort of a little intro, but I come to the next one. We know it. Sorry, we hear down here. We know self-organization like the prairie is working best, but we go over to over-control and create the weaker system. Now, in the discussion that follows, I get a lot of ideas, and I put them quickly here. We don't have that much time here, and I know with your common sense you know this probably for 90% or even more than I probably. What I have on the left and the right is in the first top 12 left and right. That are the things that mostly come out of the discussions, just by common sense. And below I have put a few, the last 5, 6, I've added myself and start explaining. I think the top left and right is probably what you all recognize. And down in the, probably the same, but most people are not familiar with it, will not come up with that. Anyway, there is on the left, there's an ecosystem, there's a strong feedback, feed-forward balance. There's a rhythm, that spectral rhythm, the power law, the pink noise rhythm, what is in all ecosystems, the rhythm we measure in all living complex systems. There are no straight lines, squares, and cubes. I mentioned that already. It creates information, and altogether that whole system creates a strong emergence. And on the right, it's the opposite. To go one step further in explaining this, I have these two pictures. Honestly, they need a little bit of explanation. Down here is, I draw the constituent parts of a system. Those circles, they reflect like the plants and the little animals or whatever in the prairie, in the ecosystem. They can be in an organization, the people, they can be the organs in your body, they can be circuits in your brain. It's the tangible components of a of a system. And the control of that whole system is upward and downward. Upward, these systems, they generally develop either in rhythms, mostly in rhythms, or in shapes like we see in trees and everywhere, in a fractal way. They're splitting, following those scalar patterns. And in the rhythm, once there is a system, they create strong emergent, and that's downward control. That happens, upward, downward control. That is a whole system, constantly circular work in high frequencies, now in different frequencies, but all embedded. That's the 1F noise. And by the way, that's why I draw these arrows pink. On the right, where we try to create some linear stuff, you see that we don't get that emergence. We get that classical hierarchy of that binary stuff, which will not create that emergence and sort of drives the constituent part of the system out of each other. They don't create a coherence. They become sort of independent. They start to loosen themselves. It's not becoming a system. So that is how I often try to explain it to my my audiences in the daily practice of the university. ABC, I have already said that. Let's move on. Just one other thing. If I change the prairie, the park to 10,000 years ago, now I'm going back to that Sapient Paradox. That's where we started agriculture. And basically, the ideas, we did the same as we did with the park. Sorry, Eva, just back here. We did the same as with the park. We broke the delicate control of the ecosystem. We made like a few acres of wheat on an acre, and we discovered that acres were. We did not discover it, by the way. You and I, we can look back then and we realized that creating such a monoculture of a wheat or whatever you can create was already, of course, an ecological attack on the environment. Even if we would call it today biological, if you look to the real nature, it was already an attack because you were already attacking the diversity. But that thinking in creating acres meant you had to be divided work, you had to wait, you had to go for planning and all that stuff. You had to store things, and that changed our thinking from a more non-linear way of thinking to a more linear way. That's where sort of all this rational stuff came in, like thinking in ratios. We have 1 acre, and we have 4 families working on it, so 1/4 of the acre is for 1 family. Before you know, you are in a rational thought. Inspired by the outside world, not by internally, but outside in. Now, another little example, just how to feel it. What does that mean? I use often in my lectures this picture left under there, under the prairie. And I don't know whether you can recognize, but that is a human tower in Barcelona of the Castellers, this competition. I see Angela, you nodding. You know that.
Yes, I do. Yes, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is such a great example of what I mean with this ecological control, this feedback, feed-forward dynamic. Imagine you're in that tower, somewhere on one of these, in this case, 9 levels. You're constant moving. You are not in control, you know that. You're part of the system, but all the time you're moving in a rhythm, sometimes a bit faster, sometimes a bit slower, constantly working to keep yourself in that flow, in that rhythm. Everything controls everything. And the big thing is, of course, if one person starts to stiffen up, starts to want to control it, starts to make too much tension on his muscles, you know, the whole thing is at risk of as I showed you, at crashing. I think it is maybe a little bit of, yeah, too simple an example, but that is how I feel when I look to the pictures and the prairie and the farming above. It's the self-organizing whole system versus starting to go there in a more binary way. Okay, that is just the idea behind this. Now, I turn back to this and to growth and derailment and the Sapient Paradox, but I assume that talking much about feedback feed forward is a bit useless here, because we all know that. And so I only give this citation of John Holland, actually summarizing what I just said. Complex adaptive systems, they have they generate feedback and feed forward loops that creates the emergent behavior of distributive system structures and all the nonlinear properties. That's basically when it said that. That said 30 years ago already. And on the other hand, this last sentence is interesting because that's the one I'm continuing with, is that you need a constant change to this. To create that stable disequilibrium, you need to move between order and chaos, and there's always change needed. That's what I will pick up now. But the rest, I assume, feedback feed forward stuff, I do not need to explain further. Look here. There's a thing, and I come to that here. How does an ecosystem maintain this balance between order and chaos and order? Depends where you, the end starts at the beginning and the beginning at the end. It is by life cycles. It creates a diversity by life cycles. There is no other way to do it. If you grow and you stay alive, you're in the feedback feed forward balance. You start with a load of with feed forward, positive feedback. That's all beginning for the S curve, the exponential part of the curve. And after a while, when a system becomes more mature, it becomes bigger, which you need more negative feedback loops. And externally, you get your environment that pushing you back. And at a certain moment, you have the negative feedback and the curve changes to loses its momentum, and it stops and then is ready for renewal, because in the top, the third tipping point, just above that, this part of the curve, it's weak and it's ready for offspring or harvest and renewal. That's a nice paradox. The feedback dominance makes it weak, but the weak system makes it also available, capable of renewal. And if we don't do that, we go on, and basically by disrupting the feedback feed forward balance, as we do by creating these linear options and adding energy, we see very often something like exponential growth for a while. It will break down at a certain moment, but you see a longer exponential growth. The farmers, they sow the wheat. They saw suddenly they got far more food than they ever thought, and of course very happy. And as of today, we see everywhere in the economy this exponential growth thing happening, grow. And later they discovered that all that exponential growth gave more children, more people, and again famine and other negative stuffs. But anyway, this is a bit what's happening here. The risk of destruction is avoided by renewal, by the system all the time, by the balance, and risk of destruction is created by exponential growth, by breaking the feedback feed forward balance. That was sort of 4 billion years successful. Now, a little step to the S curve, simple, just only a simple in between thing to say the same in a more simple way. You see here in the S-curve, the seasons are always a great way to symbolize the growth curve. Of course, it is mathematical, and it's always in many ways to describe this curve, but in seasons is a useful thing. And of course, on the left, this typically from my business university background, I draw here some dollars because here you have the harvest, but it can also be apples or whatever, or a piece of art. But anyway, the success is in the fall. That's where the systems work. That's where the system is weaker. That's where you get a harvest. And we see everywhere, even I talk for myself in my personal life in the past, and I thought I'm on the top, I go on this way, and then suddenly you see that the world is changed. But humans, I think from the very beginning, wanted to break the curve to gain exponential profits. And in many, I'm walking, years that I walked from one boardroom to another, and every time I explain them, this place in the curve. And so, honestly, from an ecosystem, there's no way that the ecosystem is ever going to allow that. If we do it and we force it, it will come back later. And now this sounds a little bit more difficult, but it's basically as simple because I changed the seasons by an early, a middle, and a late phase of the curve, and the characteristics. In the beginning, the curve is just fragile. That's chaos. That's innovation. Look, you hope that it is already protected by the existing curve, by an existing curve. In the middle, B, where that's where the ecosystem is strongest between the inflection points of the growth curve. And the last one is where you have the harvest. And it is so easy. Every organization you can put on this curve, but ecologically, you see in the middle part, you see the drawing of the healthy ecosystem with this top-down and bottom-up control. And the more you move to the right, you move into this linear phase and breaking it down. But there you get also the exponential growth. These systems go loose, they are not controlled anymore, and they can be seen independently. And there is a lot of danger that these independent loops that can just be a product, that can be a whatever loose cannon, can create a lot of havoc, ruin havoc, or a lot of profit. So that's basically breaking the system, gives a lot of profit. And that comes to a paradox that in our development, I mentioned here already, I come to that in whatever 10 minutes also, that we might need the corrupted system to keep our development going on. Let me see that for a moment. We come to that later. And I talked about pink noise. I talked about rhythms. I talked about the dynamics of that. In the phases, you have chaotic dynamics, you have ecosystem dynamics, and you have linear dynamics. And I'm not going on to, that would take too long on the Fourier analysis, a 200 years old mathematical method that is now, of course, totally, digitalized, and it is in mathematics. It's, I hope there are few mathematicians among us, but it's probably one of the 3-4 most used methods in mathematics at this moment, and physics. But anyway, you get a spectrum in the chaotic phase. That's called white noise, like the old television screen. Pink noise, that's what I mentioned, that is the rhythm. And the linear dynamics, the red noise, is more static noise. I have here, just I jotted it down here. Yeah, here on this change between pink noise and red noise. When I teach that in my own classes, I say it is the difference when you listen, for example, to a good piece of music, and then I let them listen to Fürelise from Beethoven, for example, and people start to entrain with that. They love that music, of course. We all know that, so simple. And then I give the example of doing exactly the same music, but then linear. You can call it a red noise, but linear with a metronome, precisely as it should, or by a computer. And people suddenly realize that the sloppy version, the professional version of Fiore-Lise, that's what they call the sloppy version, because people have interpreted and never follow precisely the tact, compared with the red noise, is precisely then suddenly you lose that emergent property, you lose the entrainment. People suddenly are not connecting to the music anymore. It's a very interesting thing to say, but it's so simple to explain this difference between what's the emergence of a healthy system and what is when you break it, then you get this dead stuff that is not coherent anymore. Okay, here I am, just about middle part of what I wanted to say to you, just standing back for a moment where we are. I have tried to illustrate it in a few minutes that the Sapient Paradox might be related to the fact that not being smarter than the system, that by becoming more simple than the system and focusing mostly on breaking the feed forward and feedback loops out of their normal dynamic and creating an exponential growth, we got a lot of wealth, we got a lot of development, we got a lot of things we did that exploited the slow moving ecosystem, but that indeed the agriculture might have influenced our thinking, our acting in such a way that we created this fast moving world separate from the ecosystem by sort of escaping the success formula of 4 billion years of control and delivering that into 10,000 years of development, which is of course a super short time. Now, one thing I said already, well, 20 minutes ago, 25 minutes ago, that there is, if we follow Ashby, there's good reason to think that the brain is more or less like the ecosystem. It's organized like an ecosystem. And it is, I read it in more and more places. Busacki, one of the most referenced neurophysiologists in the world at this moment from New York, maybe the people who know him. And actually, by the way, what I did not say is that since I got chartered as a psychiatrist neurologist, I spent another 15,000 hours in all my evenings and weekends on understanding the brain. And that sounds a lot, but over 40 years, it's not that much. But anyway, something about the brain. And my only conclusion is really the brain's dynamics and the emergent mind is you can almost copy paste the laws of the ecosystem on how our brain functions. And the connection between the two is in essence entrainment, the rhythm between, and also in the rhythm, the information is stored. So that entrainment, how does entrainment feel? When I try to teach that, I do it as follows. I ask my audience, can you feel, what do you feel with this picture? Now people mostly feel hurry, busy, whatever, a little bit tension, and name that all. And then they say, okay, that is the sort of non-ecological way of behaving. And then you say, come on, now this picture, what is the resonance? What is the entrainment? And then I ask, how do you feel after a whole day of work, of decisions and action planning, and et cetera, et cetera? People feel mostly tired. And then they go down, and how many actions and decisions do you need to feel good in nature? Now, most people will answer a second, few seconds, and it is, and I feel it. And that is what I mean, that speed, that is this rhythm, that is that entrainment, that interaction, ecosystem, brain. And it is a very simple one, but it's just for the short time we have. It's just an example of these more theoretical pictures. And of course, this is the reverse. This is the same. And entrainment is a matter of rhythm within the whole system, right or wrong. And this is then the focus, the wrong side. If the brain is really not functioning in a way like it should be as an ecosystem, it will harm the ecosystem, and the reverse is that also too. If one harms the other harms the one. In more common sense behavioral terms, I could make lists of words. On the left, I have put a list of words related to a context that creates coherence, ecological control, and of course, strong emergent wholeness. Now, there's a whole list of words: integrity, respecting others, honesty. Now you walk it through with your eyes. And on the right, of course, I have put the other side: exponential growth, to control, laws, rules, procedures, winning versus losing principle, profit as a purpose, the bureaucracy, efficiency, and the more down under, if you have that low requisite variety, you cannot create recursions like reflection, like humor, like self-consciousness and the like. There are a few things here where I like to comment on that. We talk, yeah, this may be weird to say that, but I'm writing a book, and I discovered that there's been huge research at the United Nations in human values. They found thousands of them, and they concluded that about 90% of all the money that's lost in the United Nations is simply by lack of values. And then they went on in Brussels. It is here about the UAI, the Union of International Associations in Brussels, did this research over 40 years. They couldn't find a real definition of values in the literature, and suggested why should we not look in complexity theory and cybernetics to values, and without really focusing strongly on it. For me, human values are basically the same as the emergent properties of strong emergent properties of ecosystems. And I rather start, instead going into discussion about values, I rather, because words are so meaningless. Words are always created by the context and not by their sound. I rather talk about cluster or sets of words that create coherence or describe creating coherence, and then in that set you have integrity, values, love, respecting others, caring. My question all the time: does it create coherence or not? And that's the one end, and the other one is, does it create decoherence? And there are a few words there. Exponential growth. Yeah, I'm in the business language, I see every day that is sort of the holy grail. We need to grow, and it seems that people are not at this moment not going away from that. But an interesting thing down there is that rules, laws, procedures, they create, normal ecosystems don't have laws, rules, procedures. A law, when we started 10,000 years ago to sort of get this lodged, we started to build cities, and we needed, because these cities were too big for ecological control to stay coherent, we created all rules and procedures. And interesting, it's all feedback loops. So you add on a system which already is getting disconnected by an by a lack of dynamics, you create feedback loops who even create less dynamic. So basically, I think when we started already 7,000 years ago to make laws and rules and all that stuff, we created a medicine with a lot of adverse effects. And I think laws and rules, procedures, as soon as they are just too much, they become more the cause of the problem they pretend to solve. And that's all the same with efficiency. I see in so many businesses this efficiency drive, but for me, efficiency is the last word for bureaucracy, because you repeat things, you probably try to make the things as precisely described as possible, and before you know, you killed your company. So a few of these examples behind these words. Now, my last two slides. What are possible consequences? And to be honest, Carrie and Mark, they know it, but I'm a bit of a pessimist. But we could be here in a vicious circle of two reinforcing derailments. We have what we see everywhere around us, this ecological derailment, global heating, loss of diversity, increasing pollution, and I would also love to say the mobile phones, the rhythm pollution. All the rhythms are, you know, the answer on going fast, most people think it is going faster. My answer on going fast is rhythm, not speed. But anyway, we have this ecological derailment, and that causes also a mental derailment. Individual, social. So loss of requisite variety, integrity, values, things fall apart. You lose your immersion strength. And that in itself can reinforce each other. And there our thinking makes our solutions are still from the non-ecological way we are thinking. And we try to, from that perspective, try to improve, have solutions for the ecological dynamic. And I think that is most of the solutions that we invent are reinforcing the problem they pretend to invent. And being so part of an ecosystem, I'm inclined to think that, how paradoxical it might think, we are not the cause of the derailment. We are maybe not even the cause of the global heating, because we are so, when we started to derail 10,000 years ago, escape more or less from the rhythm of the ecosystem, that was not someone who wanted to do that. That was just the process. Maybe it was an accident in the waiting for maybe 200,000 years. So I am more inclined to think we're so part of the ecosystem. We are not the shooter. We are at best a smoking gun. Now, digital solutions, I've said that already. So my second last slide here. Given what I said, our derailment, the derailment of society, might not be perceived as a side effect of our exponential development, like something that needs to be cured, like we have big companies, they produce, they pollute, they create maybe social problems. Those are the problems we should cure by charity and by ecological management. So seeing the derailment as the fever of a sick body, it could very well be that the derailment itself is the primary condition for our wealth, because that is what creates the exponential growth. And that's what my third bullet there. Derailment might be a fundamental precondition with which humans escape from ecological control in order to create a modern wealth. Without derailment, no wealth. And the last point basically says it a bit more sharper. We need derailment to have exponential growth and be wealthy, at some places in the world at least. That sounds a bit cynical, but my thinking come to that conclusion for the time being, for the story I have now. And finalizing, this is my last slide. I'm not saying there's absolutely no solution, although I have in no way practical solutions, because I think it's very difficult. But ecosystems do have always an abiotic and a biotic, that the arrows on the right aspect. Ants in an anthill need pine needles to create an anthill. There's nothing wrong with working with not biotic material to create an ecosystem. So there's, and in the fundamentals, most fundamental definitions of an ecosystem, it's always combination of abiotic and biotic. I think there is a way to go, like in the digital infrastructure, in AI and all these things are derailing as if they can replace us. We need to integrate them in an abiotic biotic dynamic, which will completely look different than we have today, but there is in any way a way that is already existing for the whole time of the evolution. So that combination, and that means ecosystem always based, I said that already. And by the way, the other thing is that although I don't have all my flip charts, and I'm a creative person, I can think and brainstorm about what we could do. But whatever we do, we have the fractal dynamics of complex adaptive systems. We have the methods, we have the mathematics, we have the experience that we can measure the fractal dynamics of complex adaptive systems and see whether they are ecologically incoherent or not. There are, just for your information, like in the Occupy movement and the whatever 15M movement in Spain, researchers in the UK have assessed 600,000-700,000 chats on the internet, and could assess with Fourier analysis 7 different political groups that perfectly matched with their attitude around being very coherent, very value-driven versus very chaotic, aggressive, rebellious, or very fascistic. It's very interesting that already some research is going on that shows that Fourier analysis can also very well measure the cybernetics of human behavior. But for the time being, more practical, more personal, that's a conclusion I would like to end up, is that being such part of that ecosystem in such a flow and stream, my gosh, my personal attitude is become ecological humble. Just be humble. It is such a big thing over us, and stop with thinking we are sort of the top of the ivory tower of evolution. We are just part of a system, and we must be very careful with that part and the system around us. Folks, I hope I did it a little bit well for you, but I shared here something of me, a snippet of my adventure. That's it. Thanks for listening, and I didn't get any questions. I hope I get a lot now.
Thank you, Peter. That was really fascinating, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. We have thank you very much. We have Mark and Richard have been making really interesting comments. Would you like to talk to Richard, to Peter about that? Mark?
Well, I talked to Peter a lot, so I almost got up, Peter, and grabbed Carrie's what are those little animals, Carrie? The puppets.
Guinea pigs.
Guinea pigs. I have some stuffed guinea pigs.
Yeah.
And when Peter was talking to us a couple of years ago about this, I went and grabbed them, and just to be funny about it, which is, I think humor is probably the easiest way into everything he's talking about. And it said, where do these guinea pigs jump off of that? I no longer call it the growth curve. I just call it the death curve, because people think growth is a great idea. They don't understand death is at the other end, and it's necessary. And all these big companies and institutions need to die, not because they're evil, but because they're like Lilliputians. They're just tied down. They cannot move. And so Peter, the two people who are influencing my thinking more than anyone else in the world are on this call. Peter Robertson and Robin Asby, because they're actually working at the edge of where my knowledge is, and I can't even tell you how grateful I am to both of you guys, and of course to Stafford and all these other guys, Robin, Ross Ashby, but the people who are carrying those ideas forward into the real world, so I can use them in neighborhoods, are these two men.
Thank you, Mark. Andrew, you have a question?
Yeah. That was a great talk, Peter. I mean, we talked about this stuff before. I don't know. I still want to try and get straight what the relationship is between your talk this week and mine
Yeah.
4 weeks ago, right? So of all the pictures that you showed us, the one that's stuck in my mind is on the one hand, there's the prairie, and on the other hand, there's the park, right? And for me, they stand for two different paradigms of thought and action. So the park is all about dominating, what I called enframing nature in my talk, being in command. That's the way of going on that's grown up in the last 10,000 years. But there's also the other picture, the prairie, right? Which stands for a different paradigm. At the end of your talk, you were saying, well, what's the message here? And it's this rather disappointing message that we need to be humble, right? I mean, you could say that at the beginning, couldn't you? Nobody would argue with you. For me, the question is, how would we act differently if we understood the contrast between these two pictures? So what does the picture of the prairie invite us to think about in terms of relating to the environment? And for me, it's what I was calling in my talk poesis. Ourselves into nature rather than acting as if we're in command. And what I tried to do in my talk was to show that there are actually concrete practices that gear us into nature rather than splitting us off from it dualistically.
Now, and that is what I thought about it, the same as what you were asking. What is precisely the relationship between your and my presentation? But that is exactly what I was thinking resonated. I thought, oh, it will come in our discussions. But that is precisely what resonated with me. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Great.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Pile, would you like to talk to Peter? Can you hear us? She may not be listening.
She's put in the chat that she's unable to unmute herself.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right. Okay. You want to do your question in the chat, Pile? Ah, right. Well, no, there is no no controls to mute your speaker, but you can ask the question in the it's too long, your question. Well, let's listen to John Lee's question, and meanwhile, perhaps you can write down. Shall we try?
Hi, Peter. The
hi.
fact that you work in Monterey means that you can recognize this map. This book was written 50 years ago. It's applied general systems theory. It is what an ecologically sound society would do so that everybody interacts in a way that's ecologically responsible in their culture.
Yeah. No, I recognize that one. Yeah. No, that's self-organization, and that trying to bring that in practice. That was is in the area there of the Monterey Peninsula. Carmel, Monterey is sort of rooted, deeply rooted. Very, very interesting. I think the mayor of Pacific Grove, who before World War II stopped all the destruction there. And I was myself, still am part of the cavalry. That is the group of people, of artists and etc. In Carmel, coming together in Doc's Lab, where you see ecology everywhere and these actions. Yeah, sorry, I will not take too much time for that. if you talk Monterey and Carmel, it's part of my. I was local home. I was locally at home there. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Thanks for that.
Thank you,
Yeah.
John. Okay, Mark. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in the chat out there, I'm trying to. I always try to do this with Peter as well. He's Dutch. He's way too polite. I keep wanting to bring his thinking to bear at the highest level, at least for argument's sake. I do it at the lowest level in my work, but I just get so angry every time I come in contact with the SDGs. They just piss me off. And, you know, Peter's way too polite, but I'd like to see the incoherence of the SDGs discussed in terms that you know, that Peter has just put in front of us.
Yeah, I agree with that. I see so many people with so fantastic good intentions at the university. Also in Twente, where I'm working, that's another one. They are just steeped into SDGs, but with so good intention. But I fully agree with you that it's a very contradictory back of things. Yeah.
Yeah, people with good intentions are actually the most dangerous people, because they pull in ethical people into their back alleys and their dead ends. So evil people are much easier to dismiss. So somehow there needs to be a counter discussion going on about the UN and the SDGs, because a bunch of naive, non-cybernetic do-gooders are diverting maybe the final energy we have in this at the top of this S curve.
Richard, I don't know if you would like to participate in that conversation.
Yeah, thanks very much. The SDGs have certainly caught my attention of late, and I'm just wondering, I asked the question, do they have any value? And because I made a comment earlier, which relates to the fact they're kind of linear, but do they allow some kind of framing within which messy connectivity can happen, and merely act as sort of signposts and symptoms rather than deep causal connections? But maybe they kind of can frame things enough to get the messy complexity of viable systems articulated. That's just my thought.
Yeah. I honestly think that it's probably very difficult to define in such a complex world the things precisely. That is probably never possible. And what I see is what is important is the way how people deal with it. If they start dealing it with committees and then meetings and other meetings and rules, etc., they drill a hole for them. They go nowhere. You should see them as, I think, as sort of a bag of rough ideas, decisions, sort of, but very nonlinear, very nonlinear. That's my point. And working on one is very likely, if you fanatically working on all those goals, you might harm 3 other ones. Yeah.
If I may just come back with that, because recently within our little community in Dursley here, a few of us are starting to wonder whether the SDGs could be quite a useful way of framing what's going on, as it were, naturally within our community, to the extent of almost having like a local sponsor for each one, but the purpose being not to be the fanatical kind of silo focus, but actually to start having the conversation between the various values and activities encapsulated by the SDGs. So then you start to get the dynamics working. Then you start to see the causality, the connections, and the possibilities. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, as long as this is a dynamic process.
if I can jump in, I totally support what you just said. I just leave out the SDGs and start from what Carrie and I call, campfire conversations and cave drawings. And the cave drawings will end up being your actual SDGs, not the UN's. And they'll be vernacularized and they'll be localized and they'll have passion and interest, and they could actually lead to action rather than bureaucratic, kumbaya. Anyway.
Right. I have a question. When you talk about the low requisite variety, and you were saying that humans being less smart, we could also destroy the most complex system. Yeah.
Yeah.
What will be your? I mean, do you think that part of the problem is what do we understand as being smart? The problem is that currently what people understand as being smart is exactly the opposite of what we should understand. If we wanted to be more sustainable and realign our rhythms with nature and everything that we are doing is not, what you say is not very smart, but people are judged of being smart by what they are doing. So the concept of intelligence that is ruling in these moments our society is wrong. It's completely wrong, isn't it?
That's I writing a handful of paragraphs about it in my book. So I totally agree that intelligence is by the way, it's discovered whatever early 1900s, 19 something. So it's a bit more than a century old. And my idea about intelligence is, and then I'm talking more in the direction of what people mostly think is IQ and that kind of smartness, is basically measuring how well you can behave non-ecologically.
Exactly.
And I'm replacing, and that's a function of these paragraphs in my book, intelligence by requisite variety. For me, that is the way we should talk about intelligence. It's not about the individual like in IQ. It's about me in a context. In my garden here in front of me, there's a spider making cobwebs. He's definitely smarter than I am there. His requisite variety is fantastic. When I have to book a ticket to San Francisco, I'd probably be smarter than the spider. My requisite is there. Requisite variety is, I think, such a fantastic way to describe not describe intelligence, but it doesn't describe intelligence, but to have a clue about how well people can adapt. And on top of that, from an ecological standpoint of view, a requisite variety is in the right setting also probably well quantifiable and measurable with Fourier analysis, which intelligence will never have. So there is, but that is, I think we are in a very early beginning, but I think if we want to move somewhere, it should be realizing how important the concept of requisite variety is.
Yeah.
Peter, it just occurs to me that these two laws you mentioned, which are my two favorite laws, I talk about Hamiltonians to Carrie all the time, but I think that requisite variety is the constraining law. Don't try to do anything outside that.
Yeah.
And the enabling law, is Hamilton's law, which is find or make the situation the easiest thing.
Yeah.
I never, until this moment in your talk, I never saw their relationship to each other, a possible relationship.
Yeah.
We have, John, just wait a minute because we have finally the comment from Pile. So I'm going to read it. She says, hearts is another way of referring to felt sense, the fractal complex thinking. In this culture, we assume that mind is rational, logical, and in that sense, simple. So again, I think that what she's saying is what we are talking about. What is the meaning of being, of making sense, being intelligent, and the importance of heart and sensing as part of this being intelligent.
I think mind, there is a consciousness, there is such an enormous amount of literature about. But when you stick to the ecological model of the brain, mind/consciousness is in essence the self-organizing recursion that happens in a complex system. And when that is complex enough, it can also reflect a pattern partially about itself, not completely, because you need a context, only partially, but it can reflect on itself in a circular way. So for me, and that means you need some fractal build-up to be conscious, which means that, and Libet already discovered that in San Francisco decades ago, it needs about half a second before you can be conscious or think about you in the first place. Like the meaning of words also take half a second. A meaning of a word is also just framed, created by the context, needs a few fractal steps and takes also half a second. So conscious is for me the recursion that is happening as a process of increasing complexity for a while. And in that situation, it can be very ecological and it can be very rational. Many people think we have a left and a right brain, and in the professional neurophysiology, that whole idea is already blown away. The difference between an ecological way of thinking, a more emotional, rhythmic, and rational, is not left-right brain. It is a rhythm change. It is just going, you play a piano, you play beautiful music, and suddenly you put a metronome next to it, and then you start to play more linear. It is this fraction of a second in the brain. That's the difference between rational and emotional. It's a rhythm difference. It's not a left-right brain. It's not a localization rhythm. And so it is for me completely equal consciousness. The word consciousness is not either emotional or rational. I rather talk more, it's linear or non-linear, and it is the rhythm of the brain that defines it.
Well,
I hope that is sort of in the direction of Pilar's question.
Well, let's hope that she will respond in the chat. And meanwhile, John and Marcus are waiting. So John, will you go on?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, Peter, thank you very much for the talk. Very inspirational. I have 100 questions, but I'm going to try and limit it to a couple. Obviously, we only got a few minutes left. There's one comment. I think the first one is about wealth. That when you say wealth is incompatible, and I've always described myself as an extremely wealthy person. I just never had any money.
Oh, yeah.
And I think wealth is something that really needs to be redefined in terms of your society, and your culture, and your family, and having a bit of land and a bicycle, So, but the whole thing about wealth, I think, is a major issue.
I agree with you. I'm so steeped in this business world. I'm not only at Nehru University. I'm also part of Change Logic in Boston, which is a Harvard-Stanford combination.
Okay, great. And I got two questions about
all the time in that world where I'm a little bit stranger nevertheless. So I agree with you totally. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I got two questions about requisite the variety. The first one is, I think we'd all agree that one of the fundamental changes we need in our epistemology is to feel part of an ecosystem rather than outside an ecosystem. And in that context, requisite variety is very different. That if you're outside trying to control it, you're in one situation, which reflects on my work in cooperatives, because in a cooperative, you generally don't have separate managers, everybody self-organizes, you work as teams, and you can look at all the aspects of requisite variety, but it's very, very different when you're inside to when you're outside. Yeah. And I wondered if you'd thought about that in the context of ecosystems, which I haven't, but that's the first question. Do you want to answer that, and I'll ask the second one, or shall I go on to the second one?
Yeah, go to the. I not have yet an answer on the previous one. I need to think a moment about it. But go to your next one.
Okay. Well, the second one is the essence of requisite variety has always seemed to me as a good cybernetician that you've got a controller and a controlled, which is something that the first questions anyway. But there's always been this essence that as the complexity of the thing you're trying to control increases, you need to increase your complexity, your variety to match it. Now, what happens in agriculture, particularly in permaculture, is that you make things more and more complicated, and at some point they self-organize. So, for example, people plant these forest gardens, which have taken what Bateson calls the pattern that connects from nature.
Yeah.
The forest, you've got 7 layers, and you model that with you put strawberries at a lower level, and then other fruit bushes, and then small plants and trees. You do these several levels, and after probably a couple of years, the whole thing self-organizes. And the amount of variety you need to control that very, very complex system is less than you need for the simple system. So the whole requisite variety thing changes, that with this ability of very complex systems to self-organize, requisite variety has it. So I think what I'm coming to is that requisite variety, we need to think it through a bit further in terms of dealing with natural systems.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's definitely not there could definitely be more research and thinking. I forgot the name of the guy from Boston who wrote a lot, Bayam, who wrote a lot of about this kind of requisite variety and the hierarchy of requisite varieties in these systems you're talking about.
If I could jump in right before Marcus, I think that, John, I think your two questions are actually the same question. And I think the answer is the same. I think that once it self-organizes, you can choose to step in and be a part of the system and no longer a controller. So I think that your two questions are coming from the same place in your experience, would be my guess.
Yeah, and I think that the whole use of the word control is a really big issue.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So Marcus, and then we have the real question from Pilik. That was a comment that I missed the first time, so I'm going to put it the next time. So Marcus.
I would just like to link this to the critique of the SDGs and to the issue of recursion. The SDG, that cannot work this way. You need a recursive solution to this issue of sustainability.
Yeah,
it's interesting, you know, you see people who talk about ecology and say, well, it's all in the brain of the individual. And then you see some technocrats and they say, well, sustainability, ridiculous to try. I heard that myself with a person of the Club of Rome. And he said, I estimate the Club of Rome, but that guy, he said, well, ridiculous to procure regional sustainability solution. You can only deal with that at the level of the world. And so I want to ask you, Peter, what you think of my thought, of this thought. We have to deal with this in a recursive fashion, and that recursion goes from the individual up to the globe.
Yeah.
And at each of these levels, there are problems of a different nature.
Yes.
So you have to approach this with different ways, in different ways. You will have different causal loops and so on. And so you see, I mean, if you start up there with SDGs and you want to solve them at the level of the, I don't know, the region or the organization or the municipality, it doesn't work. And I can offer, so I see you agree with this. I can offer an article which Angela knows about this recursive approach to sustainability. So I put it in the chat for those who are interested.
Good. Now, number is just say I completely agree with you on the different levels. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and Marcus, boy, are you right? And Robin, Asby wrote a book. I think he's given a talk here that I think is so practical in his movement from Beer's VSM into the particularization of how to think about it in recursive levels of governance. And you might be entertained or not by the work we're doing in Arizona with a small community, where we're actually doing experiments to understand at the lowest possible scale what the recursive conversations are between levels of governance. You might, I've always respected your thinking and your writing, and it would be so fun to have you at least join us a time or two if you got interested.
Yeah,
you do.
Okay, well, we have the comment that Pile had made in the beginning that I missed, so I'm going to read it now. She says, one of the things you said gives me hope in a perspective that resonates deeply with my thinking, and that is that the human brain has not changed in 10,000 years. That means that we still have the capacity for what some call the felt sense, and I have been referring to as systemic cognition. It is our culture that we have deep priority to logic and linear thinking. Yes, started with the agricultural revolution and held in place by the positive loops of wealth, survival, and power control. But we do have the possibility still, if we can shift out of hubris. Example, your suggestion of humility. Will we? Looks unlikely, but hope is a manner of living that at least does not foreclose what we do want. So yes, rather than a long thought, even if in the short version. So that was her comment.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy with your comment, Bill. No, absolutely, I agree with that. It is. We do have. I know art, like we know, is probably one of the only few things that is not impacted by the Sapient Paradox. The art 20, 30, 40,000 years, the paintings in the caves, etc. Mark and Carrie, Lisbeth Vijkema and a group of Dutch painters has tried to copy that and discovered that was extremely difficult and real art. So that is why we didn't change. And we still have every inch, every bit of the original capacity to think in systems, and then I think in living systems, in ecosystems. That's still there, and I believe so strongly in it that first, now I still think, for example, I think what we do is we give children algebra. I mean, it's not only in the ages, but even in you see it in every person that is born. I would think I'm actually a little bit angry about my mathematical education, that we got first algebra, etc. And then at the end, when you were 17, 16, 17, 18, you get some calculus. Today, I realize you should start with children at 6 with calculus, because that is the mathematics of the living, moving stuff. That is what you feel, and then you add up algebra where needed. So I think that feeling for the living, and the other thing is that I am also close to being an ethologist, and which was my main stuff in psychiatry, to understand attachment theory and the ethological basis of exploration, the work from Lawrence and Tinbergen, who won Nobel Prizes for ethology. And I was very inspired to Professor Frans de Waal from Emory, who just passed away, who is sort of a male Jane Goodall. Some in the US will probably know him, Frans de Waal. And I know in primates, even in primates, there is this deep system thinking intelligence. It was in the Neanderthals. It was, of course, in the Homo sapiens, and we still have that, 100%. Yeah.
So, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Pile. Marcus, last question.
The last question I have to Mark Pearson. What is that book you were mentioning?
So I put links in there. Okay. So Robin's author gave us, or publisher gave us permission to put the preface and chapter 8, which is the chapter I'm interested in, which is on recursive governance. So I put it in there. It's a link. You can go there and you can go buy the book, which, you know, I'm sure, you know, you should. And, you know, I've got a copy laying here. What I'm looking for are people who get the theory, because action without theory is dangerous, but theory without action is worse. It's unethical. And so I think it would be so fun to have come from, because this group is all actors, doers. You know, as we get older, we may do less, but everyone that I've met at the Metaforum are actually doers. And so it would be so fun to get some doers working on recursive governance, because that's the nut that has to be cracked. Or we wait, you know, to become hunter-gatherers again and start over.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Peter, and thank you everyone for a really interesting conversation. Fascinating, the learning from you, Peter. So thank you very much. Before we go to announcements, first, next webinar is on the 5th of June. I made a mistake once more, saying that it was the 2nd of June. That is a Sunday. It is on the 5th of June. That is a Wednesday, as normal, and it's about the cyber scene by Rodrigo Fernandez. And finally, the conference this year that is in Berlin, is going to be really interesting. It's about viability and creativity. We have open registrations, and we hope to see some of you in Berlin in September 16 and 17. So thank you very much. See you then on the 6th of June. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.